We're quite certain that that video from David has made all of us think. We would like to remind you that you can donate at uc-2020.com and that we are supporting charities providing COVID-19 relief efforts and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. They include Inner City Arts, Black Lives Matter, Artist Relief, the Loveland Foundation, Doctors Without Borders, MBK Alliance, World Central Kitchen, House of Ruth, and Black Visions Collective. We'd also like to remind you that we have digital care packages available on our website. The one for David Cho, the password is It All Adds Up. We also have two very special gifts from our upcoming speakers. One from Evan Kleiman, the password for which is Good Food, GOODFOOD, and one from Craig Maud, the password for which is Walking, WALKING. As a reminder, you can also check the @Unexpected Connections Instagram for more content and to ask our speakers questions. So for our upcoming segment, we are speaking to Evan Kleiman and Craig Maud. Evan has been the host of Good Food on KCRW since 1998. She's done thousands of interviews on the world of food and drink, which is perfect because she loves nothing better than learning and sharing all there is to know about humans and how food interact. She's also a chef with nearly 30 years of experience under her belt before walking away to focus on authoring cookbooks and teaching on the cultural subjects that touch food. Craig Maud is a writer and photographer who has called Japan home for most of the last 20 years. He has written for Eater, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Wired, California, and others. He is the co-author of the books Pachinko Road, Koya Bound, 8 Days on the Kumano Kodo, and Art Space Tokyo. We're really excited to have the two of them together with us today to talk about the dedication to a pursuit and how a journey is required to gain new perspectives. Let's go live to them. Hi, Evan. Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for calling in from your locations. It's a pleasure to have both of you here to talk to each other.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
What a treat.
Yes, a treat for all of us and for our viewers right now. Just to open, something that I alluded to in the bios is, Evan, you've been hosting Good Food for 22 years now. And Craig, I mentioned that you walk, but I didn't say how much you walk. And so for an example, last year you walked over 1,000 kilometers along the historic Nakasendo Highway from Tokyo and Kyoto. So I think for me, a similarity between the two of you I see is how you play the long game. You commit to doing things that other people would maybe balk at doing. So what has sustained your interest, your individual interest in food and walking for all of these years and all of these kilometers?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this, how my mother's mantra was even on her voicemail. She would say, I'm out putting one foot in front of the other. And it's something that she said to me always, that let your curiosity take you where you need to go. And for me, the journey into my subject is driven by curiosity. And then it's fed by the constancy of the practice, I think. So it becomes like a hamster wheel with no end that has its own energy that keeps it going. Because as you take in more, you learn more, and then your focus shifts and your curiosity expands. And I have to say to Craig, the hilarious thing to me about being paired with him is that I'm the kind of person who reads books about walking instead of just walking.
He's the one that writes books about walking.
Right.
Well, I lived in Japan for 13 years before I started doing sort of what could be called serious walking, if there is such a thing as serious walking, or more kind of intentional walking. And, I thought I knew the country well. 13 years is quite a long time. I moved here when I was like 19 and went to university here, and I hitchhiked across the country. I've done a lot of traveling in Japan, but it wasn't until I was invited on a walk 7 years ago that I realized I knew so little about sort of the real historical depth of the country, and in terms of just deep interactions with, say, like the countryside or folks in the countryside. I've spent 98% of my time hidden in the center of Tokyo, really not leaving the city too much, just for little excursions every now and then. And so that first walk I was invited on by a friend and mentor and scholar, Japan scholar, 7 years ago, really kind of just opened my eyes to the fact that I knew nothing about Japan. Like, I had just the most superficial sense of what Japan was or its history. And so that, to me, really activated the interest. And it became this sort of, in the same way when you learn a new language, you kind of get more and more excited the further along you go up the pole of language skill. It unlocks all these different things. So it's like, oh, now I can read these sorts of books. Now I can communicate with these sorts of people. It felt the same way with the walking. And the more I did it, the more I felt my understanding and connection with the country deepening. And that was just really exciting. And so last year was sort of my most formal year of walking, where I started the membership program and I did the huge Nakasendo walk and a bunch of other walks. And, I'm at a point now where I'm doing, well, this year, obviously a lot has changed because of COVID. I was supposed to be on a big walk right now, but for the most part, I'm doing 2 to 3 full months of walking a year in Japan. And it's all in service to this desire to understand this place better and to connect with it in a more deeper way.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing both of you kind of talk on the theme of, regarding food and then walking, is this idea that as you keep going, the journey gets deeper, or the hole gets deeper. There are still layers that you're kind of working through and revealing. And I just wonder, but has there, because, Craig, you said you've been in Japan 13 years, and Evan, as a host of Good Food for 22 years, has there ever been a moment where you felt like, oh, maybe I've kind of reached the end of this journey, or like maybe that I've tapped as much as I'm going to tap, or has it always just been like, the more I do, the more I learn that there still is to learn?
For me, I have a kind of analog experience to Craig, in that in my late teens and early 20s, I figured out how to spend every other year several months in Italy without having to pay, and as part of my education, and that kind of grew simultaneously out of a culinary connection, because I always cooked it, so I put myself through school. And that need to not race through somewhere, but to sit in a place and deepen your knowledge by just being there was for me incredibly potent, and became sort of like a template of the curiosity that would overtake me for the rest of my life. Because I think what I learned as a kid who all of a sudden was in a very different place, a much more rural place, because in the 70s when I started traveling there, it was not as urban-based as it is now. And I grew up in LA, so this connection of food and culture, which didn't exist where I was from, was so profound, and it was so tied to place. And the more you could experience place slowly I would pretend, like when I was 18, I would pick a town and pretend like I lived there. And maybe it was 5 days, or maybe it was 2 months. But then I started to realize I wasn't pretending, that I actually was living every day. And once you slow down, I think that you just see things in a different way, and it becomes necessary. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all, Craig.
Yeah. What you just said about sort of assuming an identity. It's almost like in Japanese you'd call it cosplay, like costume play or whatever, of becoming this person for a set period of time, but then realizing you are actually becoming that person. I feel that so acutely on the walks. I think this is why a walk for me, especially a walk over kind of an extended period of time, feels especially powerful, more than like, you have all these different layers. So if you're in a plane, you get that superficial macro view. If you're in a train, you get kind of the quick view of a place. If you're in a car, it's a little more controlled, but still you're in a bubble. And even a bicycle, you're moving at a pace that's difficult to stop and contend with everyone that you're passing by on the road. But when you walk, you're going past people really slowly, and you have to choose who you want to be that day. And I found in my walks that there's almost this sort of this almost like spiritual experience of every day you wake up and you're reborn in a way. Like you can choose who do you want to be today, because you're going to pass by all these strangers and you get another opportunity to redefine who it is that you are, and to choose to engage once again as deeply and sort of with empathy and love as you can muster to these folks, these strangers that you're meeting along the way. And much like to your point, Evan, it's like you kind of do that in repetition long enough, and you realize that those habits and those emotions and those feelings of this persona that you're projecting into just become part of who you are on a day-to-day basis, even when you're not out doing the walks.
I love the goal you set out for yourself of taking portraits by 9 o'clock in the morning, was it?
10. 9's too early.
10. But I thought that was just fascinating, because it means that you must interact with somebody in a very intentional way at the very beginning of your day, which must set the tone for the rest of the day.
It's such an unlocking habit hack. It's you see that it's getting closer to 10 a.m. and even though it's this artificial, sort of constraint that you set, it works. I mean, so much of I think creativity is contingent on constraints, real or artificial deadlines, things like that. And yeah, Evan, you're absolutely right that by opening up myself and sort of taking that risk and doing that vulnerable thing of asking to photograph someone and having them come into a space and creating a space where even though they're kind of being vulnerable to me, they're enjoying it and they're having fun. Totally is such a tone setter for the entire day.
I think that's a really good way to segue into a question I wanted to ask about habits and ritual, I guess, about how when you continually investigate or continually commit to doing one thing, you reveal new aspects about it. And maybe to bring it back to Evan, since Craig talked about taking portraits, how have you discovered that repetition, whether that's a segment on your show or a recipe, unearths more for you?
Well, I think my whole culinary life, my chef life, was all about that repetition and handwork, which for me is everything. I mean, it keeps me from going insane. And it's interesting because I think of this period of time, and the first thing that came into my mind when you were formulating your question was doing the dishes. Because I think doing the dishes is has so much metaphor attached to it, and it's something everybody is doing now more than they ever thought they would ever do in their lives. And I love it. It's how it used to be when I worked in the restaurant, that at the end of the night you would put everything away and then you would just clean like you had never cleaned a space before until it was absolutely spotless. And the sense that you have of an ending of a day so that you can begin a new day at just at zero to start over was so comforting. So there's that. But also I would say that for me, just making food is the using my hands in a way that now I've done it so much requires no thought. It's like driving. If you've driven since you were a teenager, by the time you're middle-aged, you don't even think about what you're doing. You just do it naturally. I find the physical practice to be incredibly anchoring. So this period of time, actually, of being home and having to cook every day and do the dishes and not feel guilty about using that time is the one part of this whole situation that is a blessing.
Craig, that actually kind of reminds me of something you wrote. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but when Evan was talking about doing the dishes, it reminds me of something you wrote about changing your kitchen space to be just 1% better every day. And I was wondering if you also hit on the same thing that Evan's saying about like that kind of making food and then tidying being an anchoring part of the day.
What is 1% better? I need to know that.
What it's like going, all right, well, what can I, how can I organize this one thing a little bit better? Like, do I need a new container for my pasta? Like, is pasta in like kind of a weird pile in the corner? Is that the best way to store my pasta? Or like, I was thinking about like, do I need tongs? Oh yes, actually I do need tongs. Like I don't have a good set of tongs. It's like, so just every day just thinking about what kind of isn't working. So taking a step back and going, what in this space isn't quite working? And if I look at my my kitchen, I should have taken a photo of it like before the pandemic, and it's just a completely different space, but all in service to being able to use it more efficiently and it's a working kitchen now, as opposed to kind of this thing that I used to sometimes engage with, but now I'm engaging with for 2 or 3 hours a day every day, which for me, it's funny. There's a lot of obviously negative that happened during the pandemic, and it's still going on. But for me, this changing of my relationship with the kitchen space is so profound. And this is something I'm going to take with me through the rest of my life now, and I feel really grateful for that. But I think to your point, Evan, about like doing dishes, if you step back a little, it's really a discussion of maintenance. And I think for any creative practice, maintenance is so critical. I think people sometimes forget. Like I run in office hours quarterly with members of my membership program. And I ran one a month ago, and most of the questions were about being a better writer. How do you become a better writer? How do what are tricks? What are tips? And it's just, all you have to do is work at it every single day until you're dead. That's it. That's all you have to do every single day.
Yeah, that's it. You put one foot in front of the other.
That's all you have to do every single day until you're dead. Spend like 2 hours with everything else turned off and write. And and then when you're not doing that, make sure you're reading great books for a couple hours a day. That's all you have to do. That's the trick. but you can never stop. It's that until you're dead thing that is really, I think, key. There's no magical line you cross and then it's like, oh, it's all easy now. And the same thing with dishes. Like it's not like you do one giant dishwashing session and then I'm done with dishes for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'd love to know how many people switched permanently to paper plates now.
On the subject of writing, since both of you are writers, but at the same time, while writing is a solitary activity, like Craig said, something that you do by yourself for 2 hours and try to turn everything off and you do that, you both have this constant communication with a dedicated audience that have really chosen to be in tune with what you're writing and what you're saying. I was wondering, how does knowing that you have those audiences, through Good Food and through the Explorers Club, like change your work or change how you approach making and presenting your work?
I have thought so much about this week, especially more than I've thought about it ever, maybe. I feel a great responsibility to try and hold in the way I interact with people, because the work that I do, I'm always in service of somebody else. You know, I'm in conversation with somebody else. So I want to be of service to them, but I want to also be honest and be me. And I don't want, and then you have to hold what the moment is that you're living through, because it's radio, so it's present. I don't know that I have an answer. I'm just thinking a lot of thoughts about it right now, about my failures and how I'm going to go forward and how it will change. My team, we've been talking about nothing else for the last several days. I don't know. I think. Please.
I was just going to say, I'm just so in awe, Evan, of your like the amount of output and the amount of sort of reach you have, and the kind of the scale that you're operating at is so powerful and inspiring.
But it's,
I would
but on one level,
it's
just food. But then on another level, it isn't just. It's very odd.
Right.
Yeah, I think for both of you, this is my personal take. I don't think it's just food or just walking. I don't have an answer either, and I totally accept, that the two of you might not either, but you've brought together readers around a certain subject, but that doesn't mean you are limited to just talking about food and walking. And I also think that those two subjects actually touch on so many other things. Craig, if you had you want to elaborate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like obviously, I have no experience with what's happening to people of color in the States. Like that. That's not something I can talk about or write about with any authority. And so the best I can do is point parts of my audience towards great institutions that are doing incredible work that can help move these things forward. That's kind of how I see my position with that. But I do have the ability to sort of go deeper on other social issues. And so like one of the things that, for example, that is connected with walking, and even though a big part of the walk last year was about food and about pizza toast, a lot of the places I was walking through and the kisoten, the cafes that I was going to and patronizing, are parts of Japan that are being depopulated. And this is a real social issue that is affecting immigration issues. It's affecting pension issues. And, it's one thing, again, this is what's so powerful about walking, is that it's one thing to read about these issues in the abstract and to go, oh, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, the Japanese population, if you look at it statistically, yes, it's becoming more and more top heavy. And what does that mean in terms of, accepting immigrants and giving immigrants a better position in Japanese society? But it's another thing to walk through the countryside and see and feel these towns and villages that are disappearing in real time, and to go to a bunch of these shops and restaurants that are of an archetype that within like 10 years won't exist anymore. In a lot of ways, sort of like the New York Manhattan diner, kind of disappearing from the landscape because of cost of rent and, changing sort of socioeconomic, makeup of neighborhoods in Manhattan. And so, for the walking work and for my membership program, I've tried to focus on the things that I'm having a direct experience with, and I found that to be really, really powerful.
And for me, if I could just go back for a minute, when you do something like this for as long as I have, you there's just layers and layers and layers, and you start to see all these connections. And obviously, there are these through lines, these truths that become revealed through food that I think this moment we're seeing in abundance, from the brittleness of the food chain, poverty, hunger, related to the gig economy, and struggles of people of color. But another thing that I do when I'm lucky enough to do it is I teach food studies at UCLA. And the class that I teach is called We Are Stardust. And because literally we are. And the idea from soil to through soil, through photosynthesis, through plants and animals, that who we are as humans, that we basically mediate nature through food, is something that becomes ever more fascinating to me. And so I'm always torn between telling the huge story in a personal way, you know?
Yeah, I see that as well. I see the two of you, and we've been talking kind of big picture, but you two tend to use more specific examples, you know, intensive research, being detail oriented in order to explain those bigger sociopolitical, cultural ideas.
It's endlessly fascinating. And Craig, you have to come on Good Food and talk about Kissaten, because now I am obsessed.
It'd be my honor.
I've heard that Eater essay was heavily redacted, so maybe you can go on Good Food and correct some of the redactions.
Well, it was just truncated,
sure.
and
Sorry, not redacted.
well, there wasn't any controversial CIA reveals in the pizza toast essay, but it's actually the truncations are being put into a book that I'm finishing up right now. So
perfect timing.
I love how the two of you are like crossing over, one writing about food and the other about walking, and yeah, moving forward that way.
Those spaces just seem magical and so sad to let them go. Just also the physical spaces. And I believe that when, you know, I had my restaurant for 27 years, and some of these places that you explored have been run by people for 50 years. What an amazing place to walk into. Just
unbelievable. It's like, I mean, walking into museum set pieces, you know, and the kind of the heartbreaking aspect of it is a lot of these Kissaten were started not because these people had an obsession with Kissaten or that it was their dream to run a Kissaten, but because of the economic situation, post-war economics, what was happening in Japan in the 50s, 60s, necessitated that, like, this was in some ways the only option they had. So they don't see their children as, you know, being able to carry on the Kissaten, carry that flag, because they see it kind of almost as a choice they would never want their children to make. So it really is, for a lot of these establishments, this is the final generation to be running them, and so, you know, there's something kind of heartbreaking about witnessing that, but, you know, also something, you know, beautiful about watching this kind of cycle sort of make its loop and come to an end.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment before we move into the audience Q&A. It really does sound like I will wait for the Good Food episode on pizza toast between the two of you. So if the two of you stay with us, we will move in a second to audience questions. Okay, I have this first question from Mary in Honolulu, who says, "Hi, Evan, I love your show. I wonder if you have plans in the near future to highlight more POC restaurants or chefs, specifically social justice oriented and Black owned restaurants. Thank you.
Well, I think that the show always has had a social justice bent, always. And probably in the past, a lot of our stories that focused on that were agricultural, but absolutely yes. We already started with last week's show, and we're meeting constantly about how just a greater awareness of the power we have to move the mic, so to speak, in one direction rather than another will never go away again.
No. Is there any chance you want to speak about anything specific that you have, that you're looking at?
Well, next week's show, you know, over the years, we've done a lot of segments with people of color and talking about the various cultures related to that live with people of color, because the culinary cultures aren't monolithic by any means. And so next week, as an exercise, we're going to revisit quite a few of the segments that we've already done. And one of them that I'm really looking forward to airing again is when a book came out called Thug Kitchen, written by two white people, a young white couple. And a lot of people took umbrage of it. And it was one of the few interviews I ever did where I was sort of journalistically putting people's feet to the fire, because typically that's not what I do. And then I had an opportunity to break down the reaction to that whole scandal with Bryant Terry, who's just a really wonderful thinker and author, cookbook author in Northern California. And we're going to re-air that segment this coming weekend, along with many others.
No, look forward to it. We have a second question that's for Craig, and it's from Sam in Los Angeles. The question is there an overarching objective or personal quest guiding all of your projects? And how do you feel about your progress on this front?
Oh man, hit me up with the easy question here.
Two-parter.
So my cosmic guiding principle for eating pizza toast is I mean, I guess, like, to just speak broadly about this is one part of my past that is sort of present in all of this work that I'm doing, and in my desire to kind of feel closer, I guess, to a place and to understand a place more deeply, is that I'm adopted. And so this element of being adopted and this element of sort of genetic disconnection from groups as being kind of implicit to my experience of the world is certainly something that I keep in mind. And there's definitely, a strong case of psychoanalysis as to why I'm living in Japan as sort of, a response to this as well, I'm sure. So I'm very, very interested in what it means to be part of a group, what it means to integrate, what it means to be part of a family, and where those kind of lines sit, and when they're crossed and how you can cross them, and when they're also uncrossable. And so that's sort of definitely a background buzzing guiding principle for a lot of what I'm working on.
All right, a third question. This one's back to Evan from Tanya in Orange County. As America moves from a multicultural place to more of a polycultural realm, one that is cross-cultural and where individual identity is grounded in cultural centricity, how will this affect cuisine trends?
Wow. She's asking me to answer. I was actually thinking about this morning, in fact, and I'm not kidding, how, well, with this generation of chefs that we've seen expressed through their own personal stories, I think that's only going to become more heightened, although part of me feels like the response to COVID in restaurants is going to be to pull back and rely on comfort, on foods that can be prepared more easily, more cheaply, with more accessible ingredients. But I really think that, what Craig said before about being adopted, I wasn't adopted, but I was the only child of a single parent, and I lost my father very young. And when he died, that side of the family never spoke to me again. I was 8 years old. And so this sense of feeling adrift and not attached to my family and to my Jewish heritage made me into a voyeur that I spent so much time in people's houses after school when I was a kid. And I just came to really feel deeply that every single house was its own culture. And I think that we keep seeing that story told over and over and over again through food now. And there are Venn diagrams where we link. But I really believe that the culture of place-based foods is never monolithic.
Okay, thank you. That was a great answer to a great question, Evan. Last question for both of you. This one's to Craig, but feels like could go to Evan as well. Michelle from Vegas asks, which perils of technology worry you most?
Wow. The perils of technology. There's so many to choose from. So many. It's the smorgasbord.
The voting machine.
Of perils. Yeah. Oh, I don't. I think there's much more nuance to the badness and goodness of technologies than often gets discussed publicly. And so part of I think what worries me, and I guess is present in my work, is more just a generalized ability to be quiet with yourself. That which is sort of almost agnostic about, is it social media or is it YouTube? Is it, just video games, whatever. But this ability to kind of just pull away from things and to spend time alone and to reflect. And, I framed I sent a newsletter yesterday where I was talking about bullies and what worries a bully? What makes a bully most fearful? And I think alone time, self-reflection, quietude, these are all things that bullies are petrified of, because it requires vulnerability and it requires a contention with, who you are, where you are in the world right now. And so just generally, I find that it's so difficult to be bored by default. That is the thing that worries me most about today, is that I think there's tremendous value in being bored and to being quiet and to not having something to engage with. So just that generally, as it applies to all technology, to me feels a little bit worrisome.
And for me, I think that's absolutely right on. One aspect of the performative nature of social media that I found really threatening during this period, during when we all got locked inside, was the type A behavior that just immediately flowered in the food world, of everybody doing Instagram lives and everybody doing cooking demonstrations, and it terrified me, actually. So I went more silent than I have been in years, because I felt like it seemed to me like it was just a chorus of hands. Just pick me, pick me, pick me. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to compete like that. Yeah, I think that quietude is a gift, really. Although, on the other hand, during this period of time, we've actually seen social media used for unbelievable good and connection. You know, I saw, I had a family reunion today on which there were 100 people participating.
Yeah.
And it was incredible, you know?
Well, I think like both of you are saying, it's more about selectivity, right? Like that it's not, technology is necessarily bad or good, but it's whether, you know, we choose to still have, thinking back to what you guys said earlier about choosing to still be able to sit with something. And it can be something that we see on social media, but then, you know, what is the action that we then take after we consume whatever it is on technology? Do we sit with it? Do we quickly move on to the next thing? So.
I love in one of your videos, in a YouTube presentation you gave, Craig, you talked about in offices that if your design team would just throw up an idea and then if you do it on Monday, that nobody can talk about it till Wednesday.
Right.
I thought that was so smart.
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of what we perceive to be issues with social media, for example, could be mitigated by creating a little more friction. It's that immediacy that often, I think, rewards a lot of the bad behaviors that we see on the platforms. And so, you know, just applying that principle of forcing you to take a second to just think about what the thing is before responding to it, sitting with it for a day or 2 days, I think can be really powerful. So.
Okay, thank you both so much. I'm sure we all look forward to seeing what you write and talk about in Good Food and in your writing, Craig, and in the Explorers Club. Thank you again for tuning in and for having this conversation together with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, for an appointment to think.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.